The rain came back before Julian Vale did. It struck the glass doors of St. Catherine Medical Center so hard that the ambulance lights outside blurred into red streaks across the pavement. The emergency entrance looked as if someone had poured silver over the night and shaken it loose from the sky. I was standing at the end of the trauma corridor with a chart in my hand when I heard it. That sound. Rain against glass. Rain against stone. Rain falling with such force, it could make a woman forget where she was for 1 second, and remember exactly who had left her there. My name was Dr. Mara Ellis now, not Mrs. Julian Vale, not the young medical student who once believed love could survive ambition. Not the 5 months pregnant wife who had stood under a mansion doorway 10 years earlier, one hand curved over the small swell of her stomach, waiting for her husband to look at their child and remember who he was. Dr. Mara Ellis, an attending cardiothoracic surgeon at St. Catherine. The woman people called when a heart was failing and time had turned cruel. Surgery had taught me one thing before everything else: panic could fill the room, but it could not pass through my hands. But that night, when the rain battered the glass, something old moved inside me before the doors even opened. A memory, a porch light, a wet dress clinging to my knees, a man I loved standing warm and dry inside his family home while I stood outside in the storm, and behind him, another woman, elegant, untouched, already wearing the future I had been pushed out of. The ambulance doors burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher between them. A woman lay on it, pale beneath the fluorescent lights, gray hair damp against her temples, lips tinged blue. One paramedic squeezed the bag valve mask, while the other shouted numbers that snapped the corridor awake. 74-year-old female, acute heart failure, possible valve rupture, pressure dropping. We need cardiothoracic now. I was already moving. Trauma Bay 3, I said. Page cardiac anesthesia. Get an echo, CBC, CMP, coags, type and cross 4 units. Call OR and tell them I need a room ready. Then the man behind the stretcher stumbled through the doors. Soaked, breathless, terrified. Julian Vale. His suit was expensive, his watch louder than his fear, his silver carefully maintained. But his eyes were the same. I knew those eyes before I knew the rest of him. They had once watched me fall asleep over anatomy notes. They had once filled with pride when I held up my first white coat. They had once looked away from my stomach because looking would have required courage. The irony was almost surgical. Julian Vale now gave speeches about supporting young women in medicine. 10 years ago, the first young woman in medicine who trusted him had been asked to disappear. He saw me. His steps stopped so abruptly that the woman beside him nearly collided with his shoulder. Celeste Whitmore. Of course. She was still beautiful in the sharp, polished way that expensive things are beautiful. Cream coat, diamond studs. Hair untouched by the storm, though everyone else had been caught in it. She stood half a pace behind Julian, not close enough to comfort him, only close enough to be seen as belonging beside him. Julian's mouth parted. Mara. He said my name like a confession. I did not answer as his ex-wife. I had no time to. I moved to the stretcher and looked down at the patient. Eleanor Vale, my former mother-in-law. The woman who had once run into the rain after me with a coat in her hands and fear in her eyes. The woman who had loved me, but not enough to save me. Her eyelids fluttered. Her breath was shallow. Her fingers twitched against the sheet. I placed my stethoscope to her chest and listened. The rhythm was wrong. The murmur was worse. Her pulse was thready beneath my fingers. Eleanor, I said, leaning closer. Can you hear me? Her eyes opened a little. For one moment, through the noise of the emergency room, she saw me, not the surgeon. Me. Her lips trembled beneath the oxygen mask. Mara? I kept my voice steady. I'm here. Her eyes filled. Behind me, Julian made a sound I did not turn toward. Move her now, I said. I need imaging in 2 minutes. Julian stepped into my path as the nurses rolled Eleanor toward Trauma Bay 3. Mara, please. His voice cracked, and somehow that made it worse. 10 years ago, I had begged him with my silence, with my body shaking in the cold, with one hand protecting his unborn child. He had given me paperwork and a door. Now he gave me desperation. That's my mother. I looked at him then, really looked. Water dripped from his coat onto the hospital floor. His face was white with fear. His whole body leaned toward me, as if I were the last solid thing in his world. 10 years ago, he had left me pregnant in the rain. Tonight, he had brought the rain back to my door. And this time, He was the one begging not to be abandoned. "She is my patient," I said. "That is all you need to know." His face folded as if I had slapped him, but I had not raised my voice. I had not needed to. Celeste shifted behind him. "You're the surgeon?" she asked. And there was something in her tone that did not belong in an emergency room. Surprise, maybe. Disbelief. A trace of the same old condescension dressed in silk. I did not look at her. "Consent," I said to the nurse. Now, a clipboard was placed in Julian's hands. His fingers shook so badly he almost dropped the pen. "What are her chances?" he asked. "Better if you sign faster." He signed. As the nurses rushed Eleanor toward imaging, her hand slipped from beneath the sheet. For 1 second, without thinking, I caught it. Her skin was cold. Her fingers curled weakly around mine. "The baby," she whispered. Everything in me went still. Julian heard it. So did Celeste. So did Grace Miller, who had just arrived at my side and stopped short when she recognized them. I looked down at Eleanor and said the only answer that mattered. He lived. Eleanor closed her eyes, and one tear slipped into her silver hair. Then the team moved. And I moved with them. I did not look back at Julian. I could not afford to. Not because I was afraid of him, not anymore, but because a woman was dying, and whatever she had failed to do 10 years ago, she had once stepped into the rain when everyone else had stayed dry. That counted for something. Not enough to erase the past, but enough for me to pick up a scalpel. As we rushed Eleanor toward the operating room, the rain kept slamming against the hospital windows, and in the rhythm of it, I heard a door closing 10 years before. Before Julian ever begged me to save his mother, he had once asked me to give up the life that made saving possible, and I had loved him enough to believe him. 10 years earlier, before the rain became the sound of my life breaking, I had a future that fit my hands. Some people dream in pictures. I dreamed in anatomy diagrams, surgical knots, late-night rounds, the clean snap of gloves around my wrists. I was the girl professors remembered by name. Not because I was loud. I was never the loudest person in a room. But I was the one who stayed after lab until the lights flickered. The one who asked questions no one else wanted to ask, because they were afraid of sounding foolish. The one older surgeons watched quietly because my hands did not shake under pressure. I loved the heart most. Not the poetic heart people write about, but the real one: muscle, electricity, pressure, timing. It does not get to rest because someone has hurt it. I understood that before I understood marriage. I met Julian during my final year of medical school, at a hospital fundraiser his family sponsored. I was uncomfortable in a borrowed dress, studying the emergency exit map, because it felt more honest than the donor speeches. Julian noticed. He laughed. He asked questions about surgery, as if my future fascinated him. For a while, I believed it did. Julian was handsome in a way that new doors had opened before he reached them. The Vale name sat on hospital plaques and gala programs. I should have understood what that meant. But I was young, and I mistook admiration for respect. For the first year, Julian loved the part of me that wanted to become a surgeon. He waited outside anatomy lab with coffee, and told people, proudly, "Mara is going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon." He said it as if he had discovered me. I was too young to understand the difference between being admired and being possessed. When he proposed, Eleanor cried harder than I did. Eleanor Vale was softer than the house she lived in. Widowed, young, anxious around loss, she loved Julian with fear and loved me with a tenderness I wanted to trust. She called before exams, kept tea for me in the pantry, and framed my pre-surgical placement letter beside Julian's business awards. "My son chose well," she said. I remember laughing and telling her Julian had not chosen my grades. She touched my cheek. "No," she said. "But he chose a woman who has a life of her own. That matters." It did then, or I thought it did. After the wedding, Julian started building his public life. His father's company had been solid but quiet. Julian wanted more. More visibility. More influence. More rooms where important men lowered their voices and let him in before doors fully opened. The first time he asked me to pause my program, he made it sound like love. "Just 1 year, Mara," he said. We were sitting on the floor of our apartment, take-out cartons open between us, my surgical placement letter on the coffee table. Rain tapped softly against the windows that night, gentle enough to feel romantic. "I'm not asking you to give it up," he said. "Never. I would never ask that. I just need this year to establish the firm. There are events, dinners, meetings. Mom's health is not stable, and I can't do all of this alone. Let me build first. Then it's your turn. Then it's your turn. Some promises sound generous because they hide the theft inside the timing. I loved him. I believed marriage meant taking turns carrying weight. So I deferred. 1 year. I told my program director I needed time for family reasons. She was disappointed but kind. You have rare focus, Mara, she said. Do not stay away too long. I won't, I promised. Julian kissed my forehead that night and called me his miracle. For a while, I convinced myself the sacrifice was temporary. I attended dinners, edited his speeches, remembered donor names, and stood beside him while powerful men congratulated him. After midnight, I opened my old textbooks like touching a country I planned to return to. Then Celeste Whitmore arrived. Her father chaired 2 boards, and her family name moved through hospital politics and private equity like perfume. Celeste had the confidence of someone born knowing rooms would rearrange themselves around her. She opened doors, and Julian loved doors. 6 months after my deferral, Celeste was introduced to me at a gala. So you're Mara, she said, eyes drifting briefly to my plain black dress. Julian speaks of you. Not speaks highly, just speaks. Julian laughed too quickly beside her. At first, her presence was explainable. She was connected to the foundation. Her father wanted to invest. She knew people Julian wanted to know. Then Julian began dressing differently, speaking differently, correcting me gently in public. Maybe don't mention the cadaver lab at dinner, he murmured once, smiling as though he were saving me from embarrassment. Another time, before a foundation event, he looked at my dress and said, "It's beautiful, just, maybe not ambitious enough for tonight." I asked him what that meant. He kissed my shoulder. "It means you're going to outshine everyone one day. Tonight, let me handle the room. Let me handle the room. Let me build first. Then it's your turn." By the time I learned I was pregnant, I had already become smaller in ways I could not name. The test turned positive on a Tuesday morning. I sat on the bathroom floor for 10 minutes, my hand over my mouth, laughing and crying so quietly I could hear Julian moving around the bedroom, looking for a tie. I had imagined that moment for years, though not exactly then. I imagined telling him after my residency match. I imagined us both terrified and happy. I imagined him kneeling in front of me, pressing his face to my stomach, whispering promises to a life no larger than a plum. Instead, when I told him, he stared at the test in my hand. A long silence opened. Too long. I tried to rescue the moment for both of us. "I know the timing isn't perfect," I said. "But maybe timing never is." He sat down on the edge of the bed. "Mara." Just my name. No smile. No wonder. No hand reaching for me. "The timing is complicated," he said. I remember looking down at the test. 2 lines. So certain. So innocent. Something inside me heard the first warning bell. Eleanor was the one who cried with joy. She held the ultrasound photo to her chest as if someone had handed her back a piece of the future she thought widowhood had stolen. "My little star," she whispered. "We don't know if it's a boy or girl yet," I said. She smiled through tears. "Then the baby can be whatever star it wants to be." She bought tiny socks before I reached 12 weeks. Julian told her she was being dramatic. Eleanor looked at him in a way I did not understand then. "Do not make this child feel like an inconvenience," she said. Julian's jaw tightened. No one said that, but someone had. Not with words. Not yet. At 5 months pregnant, I began to show. Not dramatically, just enough that strangers became kind, and Julian became careful not to look too long. My body had rounded gently, and he moved most at night, when Julian was out late at meetings that always seemed to involve Celeste. I learned he was a boy during an ultrasound Julian missed. Eleanor came instead, crying before the technician even found the heartbeat. When the sound filled the room fast, steady, alive, Julian's text sat cold on my phone. "Can't make it. Important lunch. Tell me later. Tell me later." As if our son were a meeting note. When I told him that night, he was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting cufflinks Celeste had helped him choose for an upcoming foundation dinner. "A boy," I said. His hands stopped for a second. Then he nodded. "That's good. That's good. Not our son. Not, I wish I had been there. Just good." I asked him if he wanted to see the picture. He glanced at his phone. "Of course, later." The baby moved beneath my hand. I thought of Eleanor crying in the ultrasound room, and for the first time, I wondered whether my child would be loved more by his grandmother than by his father. Celeste became unavoidable after that. She appeared everywhere. Julian wanted to rise dinners, board meetings, Sunday afternoons at the Vale house, always close enough to make me look temporary. She never insulted me directly. That would have been too easy to defend against. Instead, she praised the version of me she wanted the room to believe in. "You're so brave," she told me, "to choose motherhood over all that medical pressure." "I didn't choose one over the other," I said. Julian heard. He said nothing. That became the pattern. Celeste would erase me politely. Julian would let her. Eleanor would watch from across the room, with worry gathering around her mouth. But she would not speak quickly enough to matter. By then, Julian had stopped calling my medical deferral temporary. When people asked about my plans, he answered before I could. She realized surgery takes a kind of life she may not want anymore. The first time he said that, I waited until we were in the car before I turned to him. "Why would you tell them that?" He kept his eyes on the road. "It's simpler. It's not true. It's not completely false." My breath caught. "What does that mean?" He sighed, as if I were asking him to solve a problem I had created. "It means we have to be realistic. A baby changes things. Surgery is brutal. Residency is brutal. We cannot pretend you'll just pick up where you left off." I paused, because you asked me to. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I asked for support, Mara. I didn't force you." That was the first time I understood how a person could steal from you and then accuse you of handing over the keys. The dinner happened 3 weeks later. Julian called it a family conversation. I should have known from the way he avoided my eyes that morning. Still, I wanted to believe. Hope can be humiliating that way. It keeps kneeling long after pride has left the room. I wore a navy dress Eleanor had given me, soft at the waist, the only thing that made me feel beautiful in a body Julian no longer touched. I brought soup for Eleanor because her heart had been acting up. When I arrived at the Vale house, the windows glowed gold against the evening rain clouds. Inside, the dining room had been set for four. Julian sat at one side of the table. Celeste sat beside him. Eleanor sat at the head, pale, both hands folded tightly in her lap. There were white flowers in a crystal vase, champagne chilling in silver, candles lit. It did not look like a family conversation. It looked like a coronation. Celeste stood first. "You must be Mara." I looked at Julian. He looked down. Something inside me went very quiet. "I live here part of the week," I said. "You know who I am." Celeste's smile softened in a way that made it worse. "Of course." Eleanor tried to stand, but one hand went to her chest. "Mara, sweetheart." "Sit, Mom," Julian said sharply. "Mom." He had not called her that in that tone since his father died. I placed the soup on the sideboard. No one touched it. Dinner began with lies dressed as concern. Julian said we had been struggling. Celeste said transitions were painful but sometimes necessary. Eleanor said my name twice, but each time Julian interrupted. I sat there with one hand over my stomach, feeling my son move as if he knew the room had turned against us. Then Julian pushed a folder toward me. I looked at it. "What is that?" "A separation proposal," he said. "Not divorce. Not yet." He was too careful for messy words. "A clean arrangement," Celeste added. "Support, housing, medical expenses, privacy." Privacy. What she meant was disappearance. I opened the folder. There were numbers inside. A suggested apartment in another city. A note from a lawyer. A clause about future communication being handled through representatives. My son kicked once, hard enough to make me inhale. Eleanor began to cry. "Julian," she whispered, "she is carrying your child." Julian did not look at me. "A child doesn't fix a marriage, Mother." The room stopped. Not because the sentence was loud, because it was final. I looked at him across the table. This man who had once waited outside anatomy lab with coffee. This man who had asked me for 1 year. This man who had borrowed my future, and now wanted to evict me from his. "Is this your plan?" I asked. "Or hers?" Celeste did not blink. Julian's jaw tightened. "It's the only reasonable plan." Reasonable. There it was. The word men use when cruelty has been proofread. I stood. Eleanor reached for me. "Mara, wait." But I was already walking toward the door. Julian followed. Not to stop me. To finish the disposal privately. Outside, the rain had begun. The rain was not gentle that night. It fell in hard sheets, turning the steps black beneath the porch light. Behind Julian, the house glowed warm candles, polished wood, Celeste's white hand resting on a chair she had not earned. I stood at the threshold, with my coat open, because pregnancy had made it too tight to button. 5 months. I remember thinking that exactly. 5 months was long enough to feel him move. Long enough for his grandmother to buy socks. Long enough for his father to know he existed. Julian held the folder out to me. "Take it," he said. I stared at the envelope. "Do you think paperwork makes this decent?" His face tightened. "Mara, don't make this harder than it has to be." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because those words were so small compared to what he was doing. "Harder for who?" I asked. "For you? For Celeste? Or for the child you waited 5 months to abandon?" His eyes flickered. Not to my stomach. To the rain behind me. That hurt more than if he had shouted. 5 months, I said, one hand over the small curve of my belly. "You waited until he was old enough to hear your voice, before you decided he didn't deserve it." Julian looked away. Inside the house, Celeste stood perfectly still. Eleanor pushed past her and came to the door with a coat in her hands. "Julian, stop this," she said. Her voice shook, so did the coat. For a moment, I saw the woman I had wanted her to be. Not just kind, not just tearful, strong enough to stand between me and the door. Julian turned on her. "Mother, stay out of this. She is your wife. She is leaving." "No," Eleanor said, and tears spilled down her face. "You are putting her out." That was the closest anyone came to naming the truth. Julian's face hardened. "This is my life." Eleanor looked at him, as if something inside her had cracked. "If she walks out tonight," she whispered, "something in you will never come back." He did not answer. That was his answer. Eleanor stepped into the rain. She put the coat around my shoulders, though it was already getting soaked. Her hands trembled so violently that the collar caught in my hair. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wanted to hate her then. It would have been easier. But all I saw was a woman terrified of losing the only child she had left, and too weak to protect the woman carrying his. "You should go inside," I said. "No." But she was already crying harder. Already looking back at Julian. Already trapped between love and fear. "You can come with me," I said. I do not know why I said it. Maybe because some part of me still believed someone from that house might choose me. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Mara." Just my name. No promise. No movement. No courage. I nodded once. Then I stepped into the rain. I did not run. I wanted to. My body was cold, my chest breaking. But I refused to let Julian's last image of me be panic. So I walked down the long driveway while rain soaked through Eleanor's coat and my shoes filled with water. Behind me, the door did not close right away. That was worse. It meant he watched. It meant he had time. It meant every second was another chance to call my name, and he chose silence each time. At the gate, a pain tightened low in my abdomen. I stopped. The folder had never left Julian's hand. I had taken nothing from him. Not the money. Not the apartment. Not the lie that any of this was reasonable. But I had no car. No umbrella. No plan. Only a child inside me, and a future I had once paused, for a man who had mistaken sacrifice for permission. The pain came again. I pressed one hand against the gatepost and breathed the way I had taught patients to breathe through fear. "Stay with me," I whispered. "Please, baby. Stay with me." A passing car slowed, then stopped. The driver was an older woman. She rolled down her window and stared at me through the rain. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" I almost said yes. Women like me are trained to say yes until something inside us dies. Instead I said, "I need a hospital." By the time I reached the emergency department, my dress was soaked, my hair stuck to my cheeks, and the pain had become sharp enough that I could not stand straight. Grace Miller was on shift. Grace had been my friend since medical school, the kind of friend who could insult you and save your life in the same sentence. She saw me from across the intake area and dropped the chart in her hand. "Mara?" I tried to speak. Her eyes went to my stomach. Then her face changed. Within minutes, I was in a bed, monitors around me, a nurse checking the baby's heartbeat while Grace held my hand hard enough to hurt. The sound came through at last. Fast, steady, alive. I turned my face into the pillow and sobbed. Grace leaned over me. "Where is Julian?" I closed my eyes. "Don't call him." She did anyway 4 times, then left a message. "Your pregnant wife is in the hospital. Pick up the phone." Julian did not pick up. Later, I saw the photos from that night. Julian at a foundation dinner, Celeste beside him, both of them dry. He had seen the calls. He had chosen which emergency mattered. The doctor told me I had not lost the baby. Not yet. But I needed rest, monitoring, less stress. Less stress. I laughed when she said it, and the sound frightened both of us. Eleanor did not come. Years later, I would learn Julian told her I wanted no one from the Vale family near me. And she believed him, because believing him was easier than testing the truth. That night, alone beneath hospital blankets, I took out the folded copy of my old placement letter. It had been in my purse. The edges were damp from the rain, the ink slightly blurred in one corner. I smoothed it flat against my belly. For months, I had looked at that letter as a door closing. That night, I saw it differently. It was not over. It was waiting. I placed my hand over my son and made him the only promise I trusted myself to keep. I don't know how yet, I whispered. But I will build us a life no one can throw out in the rain. Outside the hospital, rain kept falling. Inside me, something finally stopped begging to be chosen. I did not become a doctor because I wanted Julian Vale to regret leaving me. That would have been too small a reason to survive on. Regret is a weak fuel. It burns hot for a while, then leaves smoke in your lungs. I became a doctor because that night taught me what helplessness feels like. Lying in a hospital bed, one hand over your unborn child, waiting for someone else to understand the numbers, the risks, the choices. Love could fail, money could turn cruel. Family could stand nearby and still not stand up, but skill could be built, knowledge could be earned, hands could be trained not to shake. A few months later, Leo was born not dangerously early, but not easily. Grace stood beside me. Julian did not. When my son finally cried, grief lost its grip for one breath. They placed him on my chest, red-faced and furious, fists clenched as if he had arrived ready to argue with the world. "Hello, Leo," I whispered. "Leo Ellis. My name. My beginning again." Grace cried harder than I did. The first year nearly destroyed me. Survival was not a montage. It was debt, colic, night shifts, milk pumped in storage rooms, textbooks open beside a crying baby, and mornings when I hated Julian so much I could taste metal. Most days, I did not have time to hate him. I had a son to feed and a future to earn back. Grace became the family I did not have. She watched Leo during exams, brought groceries without asking, and once threw a towel at my head when I said I might quit. "You are not allowed to confuse exhaustion with destiny," she said. I failed one re-entry exam. I remember sitting in my car afterward, hands on the steering wheel, Leo asleep in the back seat, and thinking maybe Julian had been right. Maybe life had moved on without me. Maybe medicine was a door that had closed quietly while I was learning how to survive. Then Leo stirred and made a small sound in his sleep. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. He had no idea what I had failed. He only knew I was there. So, I tried again. The second time, I passed. Years moved not quickly, but relentlessly. I studied while Leo slept. I reviewed cardiac anatomy while stirring oatmeal. I whispered drug mechanisms under my breath while folding tiny shirts. By 5, Leo was correcting grocery receipts before cashiers noticed the mistake. They laughed. I did not. I looked down at my son, juice box in one hand, counting on the other, and realized his mind moved through numbers like a familiar house. I did not call him a genius. Children should not be turned into trophies before they know who they are. I told him he was observant. I told him being smart was a gift, but being kind was a choice. When he was 6, he asked about his father. We were eating noodles at the kitchen table. Rain tapped against the window softly, the kind of rain that still made my shoulders tighten before I remembered I was safe. Leo looked up from a maze book and said, "Do I have a dad?" I set my chopsticks down. The moment had lived in my fear for years, and still it arrived like a stranger. "Yes," I said carefully. "Where is he?" "Not with us." "Why?" "Because he chose a woman with better connections. Because he looked at my stomach and saw an obstacle. Because he let us walk into a storm, and then told himself we had left." I said none of that. "Some people fail us," I told him. "That does not mean we become cruel." Leo thought about that. "Did he fail you or me?" I swallowed. "Both." He nodded as if filing the answer somewhere inside himself. Then he went back to his maze. That was Leo. He did not always react when other children would. He absorbed. He arranged. He returned later with questions that cut cleaner than adult accusations. By 8, he could solve a Rubik's Cube faster than I could tie my hair back for rounds. By 9, his teacher called me in a voice that tried to sound casual and failed. "Dr. Ellis, Leo solved the 8th grade bonus problem." He's in 4th grade. I know. What did he say? He asked if there was a harder one. I laughed on the phone. Then I went into the stairwell and cried. Not because he was gifted. Because Julian had once called this child complicated. Leo was not complicated. He was wondrous. Quiet. Funny in unexpected flashes. Devoted to comic books where small people outsmarted monsters. And fond of prime numbers because, as he said, they don't divide themselves for anyone except one in themselves. I told him that sounded lonely. He said, "No, it sounds confident." I thought about that for a long time. By the time I finished surgical training, the old Mara had not returned. The woman who became Dr. Mara Ellis was less eager to please, more careful with tenderness, and no longer available for casual destruction. That was when Dr. Adrian Shaw entered my life. Adrian Shaw, a cardiac anesthesiologist with calm hands, entered my life quietly. He brought coffee after brutal shifts, remembered that Leo liked dark chocolate and prime numbers, and never treated my son like baggage or my silence like a challenge. Once, a nurse teased him after he brought me coffee at the end of a 16-hour shift. Dr. Ellis is impossible to impress. Adrian looked through the glass wall of the recovery room, where I was checking on a patient, and said quietly, "She survived things most people would still be explaining." I pretended not to hear, but I did. And for the first time in years, the sound of rain did not always make me feel alone. The night Eleanor Vale came back into my life, Leo was 10 years old and waiting for me outside the surgical wing. He was supposed to be with Grace, but an emergency had pulled her into pediatrics, and Adrian had offered to keep an eye on him until she returned. That was how Julian saw him for the first time. Not in a family photograph. Not across a courtroom. Not in some staged reunion designed to make a guilty man feel forgiven. He saw him in a hospital hallway. Leo sat in one of the long blue chairs outside the surgical wing, small legs crossed at the ankles, a comic book open across his lap. In one hand, he turned a Rubik's Cube, with quiet, effortless precision, not looking at it every time the colors shifted. Every few seconds, his eyes dropped to the page, then back to the cube, as if his mind had room for both without strain. He did not fidget, whine, or ask every passing nurse when his mother would come back. He just waited, calmly, like waiting had become one of the first languages of his life. Julian had been pacing outside the operating floor, still damp from the rain, his tie loosened, his face gray with fear. Celeste sat nearby, scrolling through her phone with the tense concentration of someone already managing the public version of a private disaster. When Julian's steps slowed near Leo, my son looked up. Something passed across Julian's face before he understood why. Recognition without knowledge. A bruise forming under the skin. "Are you waiting for someone?" Julian asked. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Leo glanced at the cube, turned one row, then looked back at him. "My mom. She's in surgery." Julian swallowed. "Is she a doctor?" Leo's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "She's the doctor people call when they're scared." Julian flinched. Maybe because he was scared. Maybe because the truth had come from a child holding a comic book. "What's your name?" Julian asked. "Leo. How old are you?" 10. 10. A decade. The exact age of the son Julian had not met. While Julian stood there searching for another question, Leo turned the cube twice more and clicked the final row into place. Solid color on every side. He had solved it without ever really looking down. Julian stared at the cube, as if it had accused him. Celeste looked up then. Her eyes moved from Leo to Julian and narrowed slightly. "Julian," she said. "Come sit down." Leo looked back at his comic. Julian did not move. Adrian returned with chocolate milk. "Dinosaur label?" he said. "Branding matters," Leo answered. Adrian's eyes moved to Julian. He knew enough of my past to recognize danger without needing details. "Mr. Vale," Adrian said evenly. Julian straightened. "You know who I am." "Yes." Adrian handed Leo the milk and sat one chair away from him, not possessive, not performative, just present. That, more than anything, seemed to trouble Julian. Because Adrian looked like a man who had learned where to stand. Julian never had. Once Grace arrived from pediatrics and took the chair beside Leo, Adrian scrubbed in with my team. Inside the operating room, I did not know any of this was happening. I was inside Eleanor's chest. Surgery narrows the world. The body becomes landscape. Blood pressure becomes weather. Time becomes both enemy and instrument. There is no room for memory if you want the patient to live. Eleanor's valve had ruptured badly. Her heart was failing under the strain. We had moments when the numbers dipped so low that one of the residents inhaled sharply beside me. "Stay with us," I said. I do not know if I said it to Eleanor or myself. Adrian stood across from me, calm as ever behind his mask. "You've got this," he said. I did not look up. I know. It was not arrogance. It was the truth. I had spent 10 years earning. Outside, Julian waited. Grace found him near the vending machines, one hand pressed against the wall. He turned when he saw her. "Grace." She looked at him for a long moment. Unlike me, Grace had never felt the need to polish her contempt. "You look terrible," she said. He almost smiled, but failed. "Is he?" Julian's voice broke. He looked toward the hallway where Leo sat. "Is he mine?" Grace's face hardened. "He was born after you stopped answering the phone." Julian closed his eyes. "I didn't know she was in danger." "You were called." "I was at." "I know where you were." He opened his eyes. Grace stepped closer. "She finished the career you asked her to pause. She raised the child you asked her to hide. And tonight she is saving the mother who watched you do it." Julian's throat moved. "I didn't ask her to hide him." Grace's laugh was quiet and humorless. "No? You just gave her money to leave town, paperwork to disappear, and a future where communication went through lawyers. What would you call that?" He had no answer. Celeste approached before Grace could continue. "This is not appropriate," Celeste said. "His mother is in surgery." Grace turned to her. "So was Mara's whole life, once. You didn't seem concerned about the procedure then." Celeste's face changed. "Excuse me?" "No," Grace said. "You've been excused for 10 years. Julian whispered. "Grace, please." Grace looked back at him. "She never poisoned him against you. That might be the cruelest part for you. She didn't need to make you a villain. You did enough." Then she walked away. In the OR, Eleanor's heart began to stabilize. Slowly, stubbornly. Like some part of her had decided she was not done confessing. When the final repair held, I stood still for one breath longer than necessary. Not because I was relieved for Julian. I was relieved for Eleanor. And perhaps, though I would not have admitted it then, for the younger woman I had been. The one who had once needed Eleanor to be braver, and received only a coat in the rain. Maybe saving her did not heal that wound. But it proved the wound had not made me cruel. When I stepped into the waiting area hours later, Julian rose so fast the chair scraped behind him. His eyes searched my face. I removed my cap. "She made it through surgery," I said. "The next 24 hours are critical, but she is stable." His knees seemed to weaken. "Thank you." I nodded once. "She once stepped into the rain for me," I said. "I didn't forget." His face broke then. Not dramatically. Not beautifully. There is nothing beautiful about delayed guilt. It makes people look smaller. "Mara," he whispered. "The boy?" I knew. Of course I knew. "He knows enough to be whole," I said. "Not enough to be poisoned." Julian looked toward the hallway. "Can I meet him?" "No." The word came out calm. He flinched anyway. "You don't get to knock on a child's life because guilt finally found you." Celeste stood behind him, pale with anger. "Mara, surely this is not the time." I looked at her for the first time that night. For once, I said, "You're right." Then I walked past them to find my son. Leo was asleep by the time I reached him. Comic book folded loosely against his chest, Rubik's Cube solved on the chair beside him. Adrian sat nearby, reading a medical journal as if guarding children in hospital corridors was a normal extension of his work. He looked up when I approached. "She's stable?" he asked. "For now." He nodded. Then his eyes softened toward Leo. "He solved the cube 6 times. I think he was trying not to worry." I looked down at my son. His lashes rested against his cheeks. One hand still held the edge of the comic book. There was a small crease between his brows, the same crease he got when doing mental math. "How much did Julian see?" I asked. "Enough." I closed my eyes. Adrian did not offer easy comfort. I liked that about him. Easy comfort often asks the wounded person to pretend. Instead, he said, "You don't owe him access." "I know. And Leo doesn't owe him curiosity." "I know that too." After a moment, Adrian stood. "I'll get the car warmed up when you're ready." He paused, then added, "Or I'll stay. Whatever gives you more room." That was Adrian, not rescue. Room. I sat beside Leo and brushed hair from his forehead. His eyes opened halfway. "Did she live?" he murmured. "Yes." "Good. You don't know her." No, he said sleepily. But you worked hard. Something in me twisted. I kissed his forehead. Go back to sleep. But he did not. His eyes moved past me toward the hallway, where Julian stood at a distance, watching us like a man looking at a house he had burned down and only now realized people had been inside. Is that him? Leo asked. I went very still. I had always known Leo would ask in his own time. I had hoped it would not be in a hospital hallway after emergency surgery with rain still streaking the windows. But children do not wait for our perfect timing. Yes, I said. Leo looked at Julian. Julian did not move. He looks sad, Leo said. He is. Because of Grandma? The word startled me. Grandma. Not because he meant Eleanor. But because he had already placed the possibility in language. Yes, I said. And because of choices he made. Leo turned the Rubik's Cube once, mixing a solve side. Did he hurt you too, Mom? I breathed in slowly. He failed me, I said. That is not exactly the same as wanting to hurt me. But it still hurt. Leo absorbed this. Did she fail you? He asked. He meant Eleanor. I looked toward the ICU doors. Yes. Then why did you save her? This was the question adults would ask later, dressed in judgment or admiration depending on which version of me they preferred. I answered my son, not the world. Because I am a doctor, and because what someone failed to do for me does not decide who I become. Leo nodded. Then he said, numbers are easier. I smiled sadly. Are they? Yes. They don't change the story after it happens. I looked at him, this 10-year-old boy with a cube in his hand and truth moving behind his eyes, and wished for the 1,000th time that I could give him a simpler childhood. You're right, I said. People do. The next morning, Eleanor woke. I was not there when she first opened her eyes. Julian was. Grace told me later that he had been sitting beside her bed, still wearing the same suit, wrinkled now, his expensive life finally looking slept in and frightened. Eleanor's first word was not his name. It was mine. Mara. Julian leaned closer. She saved you, he said. Eleanor turned her face away from him and cried. That was when Grace came to get me. She wants to see you, Grace said. I was reviewing labs at the nurse's station. Now? Grace nodded. She said she needs to say it before she loses courage again. Those words followed me down the hall. Before she loses courage again. Eleanor looked smaller in the hospital bed. Without the veil house around her, without pearls, without polished silver frames and oil paintings of dead men, she was just an old woman who had nearly died and woken up inside the consequences of her silence. Julian stood when I entered. I'll go, he said. Eleanor's voice was weak. No. Stay outside. He froze. Mother. Outside, Julian. For the first time in all the years I had known him, Julian obeyed her. He stepped into the hall. The door remained partly open. I do not know if Eleanor intended that. Maybe she did. Maybe courage, when it finally arrives late, does not always know how to be neat. I stood beside her bed. You should rest. I have rested for 10 years, she said. Her voice was thin but clear. Rain whispered against the window. Softer now, but still there. Eleanor turned her head toward it. The rain sounds the same. I said nothing. I used to think that night ended when you walked away, she said. It didn't. It followed me. Into every room, every holiday, every birthday I imagined and did not deserve to attend. My chest tightened. Eleanor looked back at me. I have lived 10 years inside that night. I kept my hands folded because I did not trust them. She swallowed. I saw everything, Mara. I saw him give you that folder. I saw Celeste standing behind him, dry and untouched, as if she had already moved into the life you were being pushed out of. I saw your hand on your stomach. I saw you waiting for him to look at his child. Her eyes filled. And I saw him choose not to. The words entered me slowly, not because I did not know them, because for 10 years, I had carried them alone. I told myself I was powerless, Eleanor said. I told myself he was grown. I told myself a mother could not force a son to become decent. But the truth is simpler than that. She closed her eyes. I was afraid. I was afraid of losing him, so I let you lose everything. In the hallway, something shifted. Julian, listening. Eleanor knew. She continued anyway. I called it helplessness because it sounded kinder than cowardice. The room blurred. I had imagined this conversation in angrier years, imagined asking why she had not grabbed my hand, called a lawyer, or stood in front of that door. But faced with her confession, I found no shouting left in me, only the truth. You stepped into the rain that night, I said. But you did not stand between me and the door. Eleanor's face crumpled. I know. I needed one person to say no for me. I know. You loved me, I said. I believe that. But love that only cries after the door closes still leaves someone outside. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. I am not asking you to forgive me today, she said. I am asking you to know you were not crazy. You were not too emotional. You were not asking too much. He abandoned you. And I saw it. The door moved slightly. Julian had stepped closer. His face was wet. Not from rain this time. Eleanor looked toward him. You told yourself she left because that story let you sleep, she said. But you put your pregnant wife out in a storm, so you could marry a woman who made you feel closer to rich men. Julian whispered, Mother. No, she said. You will listen. I may have failed her then, but I will not fail the truth now. The monitors beeped steadily beside her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I turned toward Julian. He looked ruined, but ruin is not redemption. Mara, he said. I waited. No apology matters if it begins with self-pity. He seemed to understand that, finally. I left you in the rain, he said. Yes. I turned off my phone when the hospital called. My throat tightened. I had never told him I knew. Yes. I let you carry our son alone. Yes. I told people you chose to leave medicine, because I could not admit I asked you to pause it for me. The room went very quiet. That one cost him. Good. He needed to pay at least in truth. I thought I was choosing a better life, he said. I looked at him, and saw the young man who once held coffee outside anatomy lab and the coward who had outgrown him. No, Julian, I said. You were choosing an easier version of yourself. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked toward the hallway. Leo, he said. I felt my body go still. Is there any chance, he asked, for me to be part of his life? I thought of Leo asleep in hospital chairs, counting minutes, asking whether people change stories after they happened. Truth can begin, I said. But fatherhood cannot be handed back like a forgotten coat. He absorbed the words as if they had weight. They did. Eleanor began to cry quietly. I would like to meet him, she said. Not as a right. Not as a veil. Only if he wants. Only if Mara allows it. I looked at her. The old anger in me stirred, but so did something else. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maybe recognition. Eleanor had failed me, but she had also named the failure without asking me to soften it. That mattered. I'll ask him, I said. Thank you, she whispered. I turned to leave. Julian stepped aside. For once, Leo met Eleanor 2 days later. Not because I had forgiven her. Not because Julian deserved it. Because Leo asked good questions, and I had promised myself never to build his life out of secrets. We stood outside Eleanor's room before going in. Leo wore a blue hoodie, jeans, and the serious expression he got before math competitions. In one hand, he held his Rubik's Cube. In the other, a comic book tucked against his side like armor. You don't have to do this, I told him. I know. If you feel uncomfortable, we leave. I know. If anyone says something that feels wrong. Mom. I stopped. He looked up at me. I know you're scared. That nearly broke me. I'm your mother. I'm allowed. He nodded. Okay. Then he reached for my hand. Inside, Eleanor sat propped against pillows, her silver hair brushed, her face still pale. She began crying before Leo reached the bed. He stopped a few feet away. Are you my grandmother? He asked. Eleanor pressed one hand to her chest, careful of the incision. If you'll allow me to be. Leo considered this with the seriousness of a child who had learned that adult words were not always stable. Did you know about me? Eleanor's tears spilled. Yes. Did you want to meet me? Yes. Why didn't you? The question landed cleanly. No cruelty. Just arithmetic. Eleanor looked at me, then back at him. Because I was afraid. And because being afraid made me weaker than I should have been. Leo looked down at the Rubik's Cube. My mom says people can make wrong choices, he said. But if they keep making them, it becomes who they are. Eleanor closed her eyes. She is right. Leo turned the cube once. Are you trying to be different now? Eleanor opened her eyes. No, she whispered. I am trying not to. He moved closer then. Not into her arms. Just closer. For Eleanor, it was mercy. For me, it was proof that I had not raised a cruel child. Julian stood outside the room. He had asked to be there. I said no. He did not argue. Maybe he had learned one thing. Maybe he had simply run out of entitlement. Through the narrow glass panel, he watched Leo speak to Eleanor. He watched his son hold a Rubik's Cube in one hand and gently adjust Eleanor's blanket with the other. He watched a life he had not built continue without asking his permission. That was the right punishment. Not screaming. Not public ruin. Not some theatrical collapse. Just a father standing outside the first conversation his son ever had with his grandmother because he had not earned the right to enter. Celeste came once before discharge, still dressed like weather did not apply to her. I found her whispering to Julian about optics, about his foundation work, about how dangerous the story could become if people learned the truth. I stepped into view. The story where he publicly supported women in medicine after privately asking the first woman in medicine who trusted him to disappear? Celeste went still. You understand image, I said. Don't confuse the two. She inhaled. I never forced Julian to do anything. Neither did I said. That was the difference between us. You offered him a door. I offered him a life. He chose the door. That silenced her. Not because she was ashamed. Because there was no elegant answer to it. Julian looked at me then. I'm sorry, he said. It was not enough. But it was different from the first apology. Less about being forgiven. More about finally hearing himself. I nodded once. Then I walked away. Eleanor was discharged a week later to a rehabilitation facility. Before she left, she asked to see me alone one more time. I went because I no longer needed to avoid rooms just because the past was waiting in them. She held my hand, fragile but warmer now. I do not expect you to visit, she said. I know. I do not expect Leo to call me grandmother. I know. But if there is ever room for me to earn one small place in his life. I looked at her. Eleanor, I don't know what the future allows. But I know this. If Leo chooses to know you, it will be because of who you become now, not because of what you regret. She nodded, tears in her eyes. That is fair. That evening, rain returned. Not as violently as the night Julian brought Eleanor in, and not as cruelly as the night he put me out. It fell steadily, silver under the hospital lights, washing the sidewalks clean. Leo and I stood near the entrance while Grace pulled her car around. He had his backpack over one shoulder, his comic book rolled in his back pocket, and his Rubik's Cube in his hand. He reached into the side pocket of my bag and pulled out a folded paper. I froze. It was my old placement letter. The corner was still faintly stained, where rain had touched it 10 years ago. Leo held it carefully, like he knew it mattered. Mom keeps this, he said, looking toward the hallway where Julian stood at a distance. She says some doors look closed when they're only waiting. Julian stared at the damaged letter. And finally, I think he understood. The future he had asked me to pause had survived him. Leo slipped the letter back into my bag and looked out at the rain. Do you hate it? He asked. The rain? Yes. I watched it fall. For years, I had thought I did. But hate is sometimes grief that has not been given a new ending. No, I said. I think I used to be afraid of what it reminded me of. And now? I looked at him. Now it reminds me I survived. He seemed satisfied with that. A few feet away, Adrian stood near the entrance with an umbrella. One umbrella. And enough distance to let me choose whether to step under it. He did not wave it, rush forward, or perform being better than Julian. He simply waited, patient in a way that did not demand reward. Leo saw him first. Dr. Shaw brought the umbrella, he said. So he did. He's better at umbrellas than Rubik's Cubes. I laughed. A real laugh. It surprised me. Adrian heard it and smiled, but still waited. That was when I understood what had changed. 10 years ago, I had stood in the rain with one hand over my stomach, waiting for a man to choose me. That night, I stood beside my son, with my own name on my badge, my own life in my hands, and a man nearby who understood that love did not mean pulling someone into shelter before they had decided where they wanted to stand. Julian appeared at the far end of the corridor. He stopped when he saw us. For one moment, the three of us existed in the same line of sight. The man who left, the child who lived, the woman who did not break. Julian did not come closer. Good. Leo looked at him, then at me. Are you sad? He asked. I thought about the younger, Mara, wet hair, shaking hands, a damaged placement letter pressed against her belly. Then I thought of Eleanor's voice. He abandoned you. And I saw it. Sometimes, healing is simply someone finally naming it correctly. No, I said. I think I finally stopped being cold. Adrian opened the umbrella as we approached. He held it high enough for both Leo and me, but did not touch my back, did not guide